So, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is the fifth Indiana Jones film, and the first one we've got in over a decade. And it's weird because like this is like the first Indiana Jones film without Steven Spielberg as the director, and without dogging on the film too much, like it definitely kind of shows. Only because like while watching this film, I feel like if I were to see like a treatment for this on paper, I would say, yes, this is an Indiana Jones film. That this is something that I would like to see. But you know, selecting like director James Mangold, I think is a good choice. Like Mangold has done great films. Like I mean, I've loved his work on Logan and Ford v Ferrari. He definitely does know how to shoot action scenes and make you care about the people within them. So it's kind of it's very disappointing, I think, to say that, you know, that I wasn't quite feeling the same thrills that I usually get with Indiana Jones, and I feel I'm very conflicted about that because like I almost feel like a different kind of Indiana Jones film is being tried for here, but it doesn't quite hit all that well. Like I mean, I can see the wheels turning. I can see it trying. And I can see shades of like the Indiana Jones type of film that I love coming through here, and it's just it wasn't hitting for me. And it's like it's one of those things that like it's a little bit hard to describe exactly. Like I can't really quite pin down one thing specifically that didn't make it gel for me as much as the other Indiana Jones films did. Other than the fact that it just didn't thrill me as much. So the premise this time is that now the story has kind of like, you know, with the progression of time, Indiana Jones now exists in 1969. So Harrison Ford's a lot older. He's in a much different decade. He's struggling to adjust to changing times. And like, I'll be honest, on paper, I love this idea. I love the fact of having Indiana Jones specifically in 1969 because there's so much to play with. There's, there's civil rights, there's peace movements, there's conspiracies going about, there's the moon landing and stuff. There's so much to play with here. In the same way that, like with the last film, like Spielberg found ways to, have fun with like the 1950s and make that kind of work for Indiana Jones while also making it about as stylized as the previous entries were. And here, I'm not quite feeling it here, and that's mostly because I think that this film wants to be a much more stern Indiana Jones. Like they definitely want to make it a much more serious picture about grief and pathos. Because I like the idea of having this new development where Indiana Jones is a character who's kind of lost everything at this point. Like, he's very bitter about the past. Like, he's not sure that he can find a happy ending for himself in this life, and he's just kind of given up. And then into his life comes his goddaughter, Helena Shaw, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and she kind of like kickstarts his life a little bit because she's a thief. She's an international thief, and she wants to track down lots of interesting artifacts and sell them. So, of course, this immediately gets Indiana on the case because, like, for one, Shaw, he feels responsible for Shaw to look after her, but at the same time, Shaw is going to steal some valuable stuff that will go against Indy's credo of it should be in a museum. So they have a great conflict there, but the problem is that this is a film that's like, it's 2.5 hours, and I never felt like there was enough time that we spent with Ford and Waller-Bridge in these roles where they had like that perfect chemistry of like Indiana Jones being like the grump who doesn't want to go back to the past, and Helena Shaw who does want to dig up the past and wants to keep going into the future, because they both have like, like polar opposite personalities, which would be great for clashing. The problem with that dynamic, though, is that the film, it feels like it's in such a rush to get to like the big MacGuffin here of finding the Archimedes dial, which may or may not have the ability to turn back time. Great idea, but the problem is with their relationship and dynamic, it's all business. Like, even like the moment when kind of like when Shaw is kind of like scoping out Indy and trying to get a feel for him before she approaches him, the moment after that, when she like kind of like sits in on one of his classes and then tracks him down to a bar, it's all business. Like, she gets in there and they're immediately kind of talking about, like, who she is. She was the goddaughter, and looking for the Archimedes dial. Here's the information we got. Hey, let's go off on an adventure. And scenes like that make me think that this film might have come in at like maybe like 3 or 4 hours and then was told to be like chopped down here, because it feels like there should be more down moments here where we get to appreciate the dynamic between the two characters and see them play off each other. And instead, most of the picture, they're just talking about where to go next, where to get the dial, and not really commenting too much on Indy's life or Shaw's life, or poking fun at it. And even moments that are set up that for that kind of like that great moment of like back and forth, especially like the first scene where Indy travels abroad and tracks her down to a criminal's den where she's holding an auction, and Indy tries to interrupt it. There's some good potential there, and instead it just kind of like rushes into like the big chase and action sequences, which to be fair, I like the way that they're set up. Again, on paper, this works. Like, I love the scene where Indy takes out his whip, like, and then this whole room of international criminals just whip out guns on him. Wonderful moment, but at the same time, it's like, I like the idea of that scene, but then like the way it's timed and shot, it's just kind of like, this isn't bad, but I almost kind of feel like that there's something missing here. And it's one of those things where it's like, I thought back to how like Spielberg can shoot action scenes, and how he always still kind of had it. Like, even after Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, he worked on The Adventures of Tintin, and there's an amazing chase scene there. Like, the one where they're on motorcycles and there's a tank running about town. Just, it's immaculately shot. And a lot of these action scenes are kind of shot a little bit chaotically. Like, the camera's all over the place, and it's a little bit hard to tell where the characters are for a few shots. It's not like Mangold, like full Michael Bay and just rickety shaking the camera here. It's definitely held firm, especially for scenes where there's clearly a lot of visual effects going on here. But it's like they're good scenes, but for Indiana Jones, like, it feels like they should be a little bit more stylized, like a little bit more, I was waiting for like to have that one scene where, like in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where there's like the giant plume of smoke that comes up, and and that was for as much as people like to like bitch about the Indiana Jones getting in the fridge and like they nuke the fridge type scene, it does lead to a great shot. And I kept waiting for those great shots, and they're few and far between within the Dial of Destiny. Just because it feels like they're always getting to the next scene, getting to the next clue, getting closer to the Archimedes dial, like getting closer to the MacGuffin, even though the big thing that I love about Indiana Jones, it's not the MacGuffin. And it's like, that's the key thing. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey. It's about the fun stuff that goes on with trying to, find this fantastical item. So that by the time you actually do get to the fantastical item, it's not like, oh, finally, what's it going to do? It's like, okay, damn, what's going to happen next? So much other fun stuff has already happened. And there is some kind of cool stuff. Like, there's a car chase, which is pretty good. I like the fact that Indy's kind of like jumping back and forth here. There's some neat stunts there. There's an underwater mission in which Indy encounters like a bunch of eels. So of course, there's relation to snakes there. You got that tomb aspect. And then of course you have like the classics of Indiana Jones and Shaw are just going through a temple, trying to solve puzzles and avoid all like the deadly traps. Very par for the course Indiana Jones stuff here. Which is all right. It works. I'm not saying it's that divergent here. If anything, I feel like it's trying to be too close to like the Indiana Jones formula that I don't really feel like this more serious tale of Indiana Jones, having grief and trying to get over his darker past kind of comes through with that. Especially during one moment where Indiana Jones and Shaw have just escaped from some men who have killed an associate of Indy. And Shaw's all excited, like, oh, we got away from the bad guys. Isn't that fun and exciting? And Indiana Jones just like, my friend just died. It's not time for fun or anything like that. Even though that's kind of been like Indy's brand more or less. But and it almost feels like that scene should hit a little bit harder to kind of relate to how Jones wants to put this world behind him, but can't quite do that. And this is where like the biggest conflict I think comes in with the villain of Voller, played by Mads Mikkelsen. Now, Mads Mikkelsen is a great actor for playing a villain. The problem is Mikkelsen's great for playing like a very intimidating and grounded, quietly sinister villain. He doesn't eat up as much scenery as like as previous actors would do. Like they were always trying to be stern, but there always felt like a level to them where it was, where it was kind of like a little bit, I don't want to say silly, but like a little bit like campiness that was brought out within the characters. And Mikkelsen is just kind of playing it straight here. And to its credit, like, I mean, if you're going to hire Mads Mikkelsen, this is the type of tone that you take with that character. And I think for being placed in this role, it works for what you hire him for. But I kept waiting for like, some moment to pop with the villain where, like he gets where, like he's definitely a threat. I love the way that they establish him as being very violent and willing to step over other people and kind of having this very mysterious allure to him, that by the fact that, he's still around after all this time and how he's still tracking the same stuff that Indy is. But it never felt like, and I feel like this is another problem with like the action scenes too. It's like I never quite felt like there was that like that kind of like campy indie element to him where it kind of related to B-movie villains. Like it feels like Mikkelsen's trying to play this Nazi character a little bit too straight. And that this also goes into what I was talking about with like the action, is that usually in the Indiana Jones films, there's like one or two deaths that are just so over the top and just so like violent. They catch you off guard and they're kind of exciting. And here, there's not a lot of that. There's like, I mean, at one point, like the Nazis get like shot up by their own guns, so that's kind of exciting, but not all that shocking. Like there's another character who gets smacked by one of the train stops, and there's a big sequence where characters are getting harpooned, which is not bad, but like you feel like these deaths could be a little bit more exaggerated. Like the last film we watched a guy get eaten up by ants, and you feel like there's got to be something more like that in this Indiana Jones film. And I feel like this is the problem with the Dial of Destiny, is like it's a clash. Like it wants to be a serious and firm ending for Indiana Jones to give him kind of like the somber yet appreciative ending that he deserves, and also being a fun and exciting Indiana Jones adventure with all like the car chases and the excitement and the classic tone and the fun B-movie serial adventure style. And they two just beat each other, and it they kind of go back and forth, like I mentioned in the scene between Ford and Phoebe Waller-Bridge, where there's a conflict of tones. It just like it doesn't quite hit the same way it does, especially when like another thing that made me think that this is like there's probably an extended cut is how they treat Antonio Banderas. Antonio Banderas shows up in this film as an acquaintance of Indy, but it's kind of just inexplicable. He's just kind of like there. It's like, oh yes, it's an old friend of Indy's who's going to help out on this adventure for a little bit. I don't know. It kind of had like that Murder, She Wrote aspect, where it's just like, oh, this is another person Indy knows because Indy knows everybody. But it never felt like, again, you got to spend enough time with that character to get to know him. Especially when you have a perfect comparison here. Like you have John Rhys Davies returning as Sala, and like from Raiders, like you don't forget that character. He's memorable. He's got some great lines. He's got his own style, and and when he pops back into this film, he's barely in this film, but when he does pop back up, it's like oh yeah, it's Sala, he's back. And then you get to Antonio Banderas' character of Ronaldo, and you're almost kind of like, wait, who is this? Oh right, that's Indy's pal. And you're almost kind of like, is this Antonio Banderas? Because they kind of just inexplicably introduce him, So I wish I could like this film more, because I like the idea on paper, but the direction just leaves a lot to be desired, even with like the like a lot of people say like the big reason to see this is that there is kind of like a big third act twist to when they do find the like the dial of Archimedes, and they do find a way to activate it, and it leads to this it leads to like the adventure taking on a new setting, which was exciting, and I like the way that it's set up. But you know, compare this to like the reveals of like the Ark of the Covenant or like the Holy Grail or what the Crystal Skull revealed, and it's not bad. Like, it definitely fits Indiana Jones, but there was never a moment where it's just kind of like, big surprise. I guess like the biggest surprise is just like in the, visually what is present here, but at the same time, it's a visual that requires a lot of like VFX for it to come together. So, like I said, it's one of those aspects where I was very much aware, like, okay, this feels more in line with the B movie nature that I love a lot in Indiana Jones. But at the same time, in that sequence, they're still trying to, have Indy try to find himself during this moment and make it a much more serious story about an old guy just trying to find some happiness in this world. And I kind of felt that way too. I was looking for like the joy that usually comes with an Indiana Jones film. I'm not saying that that it can't be serious, that it can't tackle this subject matter. But when you have the film being in such a conflict with like the serious manner and the B movie aspect, I don't really feel like it works that well, at least for me. And it's like the way that it boils down to this, like, I know a lot of people have been saying they really do love the Dial of Destiny. Like, it might be like their new favorite. And I can see that. It's just, there's something about the way that it's directed. And it's not just specifically the shots, it's not the tone, it's not even like the dialogue that's mounted up here. It's not even the fact that I don't feel like this film takes full advantage of the 1960s the same way the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull took advantage of the 1950s, but it just didn't gel with me. And the fact that it's 2.5 hours and it felt like it was just kind of like going through the typical motions of an Indiana Jones film, it just became frustrating. It just became so frustrating after a while. It's just like, it's not working here. It's not that this isn't a good idea, and it's definitely not the cast. I love what they're doing with these roles. It just feels like we're skipping by so much of like the great stuff in Indiana Jones and kind of like, missing the forest for the trees. Like, it's like they're focusing more on the destination than appreciating the journey. Which you would feel like would be like a pretty important aspect to stress for the story about Jones kind of like, looking back on his legacy and, like trying to find some comfort in that, especially with like that great opening sequence on like the train where they establish the Archimedes dial. They do a little bit of de-aging on Harrison Ford. Despite that, with the visual effects, I actually really do like that scene. That feels like classic Indiana Jones here. But what proceeds after that, I'm just kind of like, okay, I'm waiting for that same sensation to come back here. And it really didn't, especially when you have a film with Toby Jones, who's another friend of Indy within this narrative. And I kept waiting for him to like, just like, anytime Toby Jones shows up in a film, like, like something bizarre is going to go down. And unfortunately it kind of goes down before he becomes like more of a key player in it. He's a good addition. Everyone, I think, is doing the best with the material they're given here. But yeah, like as it stands in terms of being like an Indiana Jones film, it just doesn't work. It just didn't work for me. Like, as a standard adventure film, this wasn't Indiana Jones. So like, yeah, this is pretty good. It's a pretty good adventure film. But knowing everything about the franchise, this is sadly the weakest entry. And I don't say that as like, I don't think they're going to go with more Indiana Jones, at least with Harrison Ford at this point. That I don't think like it's lost its way. It's just that I'm not looking at this like, this is not an Indiana Jones film. It is. It just didn't work for me. It's just it's definitely like the dullest Indiana Jones film that I couldn't quite get behind, just because it's going through the motions.